Today, we are looking at the top, most valuable, and key issues of Marvel Comics from the year 1988. This is definitely a Venom and Todd McFarlane year. Let's look at the top 10 books based on raw copies in the Overstreet Annual Price Guide. Ranking at number 10 of the year is the Mobius number 5. It's an epic graphic novel series. This is the 5th issue in the series. And high cover price at the time, $9.99 for this series back in 1988. Print run was small, only 30,000 copies, which is probably the main reason why prices are really jumping on the series. People are no longer able to find copies. Not only does this rank as the 10th most valuable of the year, but it's number 82 most valuable Marvel comic of the 1980s. And this came to us from classic French artist Jean Giraud, better known as Mobius. This is issue number 5. It's super rare on the CGC Census. Only 2 copies have ever been graded in any condition. There is one super high grade, 9.6 or better. Heritage has never sold a copy of this graphic novel. Looking at the Overstreet price guide, you can see in the last year, all grades, even low ones, have jumped up in price. Still very affordable book, though, overall. Very scarce on the census. There is one 9.8 and one 9.4, and that is it. The number 9 comic of the year is X Factor number 24, featuring the first full appearance of Archangel, and it's the Fall of Mutants storyline. And this comic has now hit the $55 price tag raw for a 9.2 in the Overstreet price guide, ranks 9th of the year and 69th of the entire decade. And we're going to look a little bit closer at this book and point out some other key facts. It's the origin of Apocalypse. The Horsemen appear in this issue. Caliban leaves the X Factor. It features Walt Simonson cover and art. There is a CGC 9.9 copy. Print run of this book was 311,000 copies. This was one of Marvel's best-selling titles back in 1988. You'll see that almost 3,000 copies have been graded in all conditions. There's a whopping 1,672 copies grading 9.6 or better. Heritage Auctions has sold 30 copies of this in the last 20 years. Using the Overstreet price guide, we can see in low grades, this book has been stalled for years now. It's just starting to get a bump up again in higher grades. On the census, there is the 9.9. There are 810 9.8s and 861 9.6s. No Canadian variant editions have been graded. Number 8 of the year, Amazing Spider-Man 301. This is now considered classic cover art by Todd McFarlane, which is actually very similar to Amazing Spider-Man 300 with the black Venom costume cover. Print run of this comic was 271,000 copies. Believe it or not, the Venom issues did not sell as well as X Factor was at that time. He ranks 83rd place for the decade, and you can see very popular series as always. Over 3,000 copies graded by CGC, 1,000 9.6s or better, and Heritage has sold 80 of these. White background cover makes this one a tough one to find in super high grade. Overstreet price guide, low grades, just starting to move a little bit, still very cheap. All the books on this list are really quite affordable in lower grades, and had a nice big jump in higher grades. There are 180 9.8s, but 907 9.6s due to that white cover. Number 7, Masters of the Universe 13. This is the return of He-Man after he had died, and this is also the death of Skeletor in this issue, and it's been climbing the last few years, steady in Overstreet. Ranks 71st of the decade. This issue is the final issue of the series and had the smallest print run, estimated at only 19,000 copies. Very small print run for this one, published under the Children's Star Comics line, which sold a lot less copies in general. This is a classic death issue now of Skeletor. Only 82 copies graded by CGC with 48 9.6s or higher. Heritage has never sold a copy of this book. Overstreet price guide, low grades have been stalled for a few years. High grade has taken a nice jump this year. And on the census, there are 29 9.8s, 19 9.6s, no Canadian or newsstand editions pointed out specifically on this one. Number 6 of the year, one of the most iconic covers of the 1980s, Wolverine number 1. He finally gets his own ongoing series. Hard to believe that this was the first one in 1988. Because of that, People were so excited. Print run estimated at 900,000 copies for this book, making this the best-selling comic or issue of the year by far. It's the first appearance of Wolverine as Patch. We've got John Buscema cover and art, and also Al Williamson art. The back cover pinup is by John Byrne. This is the second most submitted book in history to CGC. Everybody wants this iconic book in their collection. It ranks 52 most valuable of the 1980s. Look how it's jumping in the CGC census. There are over 10,000 copies graded, including almost 5,000 9.6s or higher. Heritage has even sold over 121 copies now. Black background cover. In Overstreet, it's got a bit of a bump in all grades, including low grades. Demand is always high for this book. Remember, not only is there 13 9.9s of this book, there is even a 10.0 of this book. 2,300 9.8s and 2,300 9.6s. And believe it or not, Signature Series, there is another 1,100 copies graded in this book. This is a massively graded book by CGC. Keep that in mind. Not rare at all, just an iconic book that people want to own. Number 5 on our list, Masters of the Universe, number 12. This is the Death of He-Man issue, and this book's been taking big jumps the last few years. It ranks 57th of the decade. And learning a little bit more about this book, it is the first appearance of He-Man in Marvel Comics, and it's his death issue. Print run estimated at only 24,000 copies. Pretty cool cover art under the Star Comics imprint, which was aimed at younger readers, which is why the print run is so small. Again, CGC, very low numbers on this series, 66 copies graded, 35 9.6s or higher. Heritage has sold 2 copies of this key book. Overstreet has had a little bump in all grades. And on the census, we have 18 9.8s, 17 9.6s. Number 4 of the year. What an iconic book. This started a revolution, change in what people are collecting. It's the first artwork by Todd McFarlane on Amazing Spider-Man, and first Eddie Brock, who becomes Venom. This book had been stalled for a number of years, but it's starting to have increases in raw copies. And of course, the CG census has gone crazy on this book, and high prices hit all the time. Now, this book has gone crazy on the census. It ranks 28th most valuable of the 80s for Marvel. We now have over 6,000 copies graded, including 2,300 9.6 or higher. Heritage has sold 139. Another tough white background cover. In the Overstreet price guide, you can see I show you back a 15-year range here. It's been stalled in lower grades for a long time, sneaking up in high grades. Of course, demand is always high for this book. But again, the Amazing Spider-Man issues are not rare at all. They have massive print runs. They've been hoarded for decades. I remember even collecting all the Venom appearances way back, almost 30 years ago. On the census, we have 3 9.9s, 765 9.8s, and over 1,500 9.6s. And this book is such a key issue that even on the CGC census, we have a Hungarian edition, a Mexican edition, and a Spanish edition of this issue, getting 1 copy grade each. Number 3. Well, it seems anyone who wants $2.98, of course, wants $2.99. $2.99 is a little more popular. It's the first brief appearance of Venom. Again, it's the second issue of Todd McFarlane art. This one had a nice big jump this year in the Overstreet price guide. It ranks 39th most valuable Marvel comic of the 80s. And what else can we tell you about it? There are 3 copies graded 9.9. There are over 5,000 copies graded by CGC, 2,400 9.6s or higher, and Heritage has sold 118 copies. Another white background action cover. In the Overstreet price guide, a little bump again in all grades, had a nice jump in really high grades. If you want to see how the super high grade books are doing and graded copies, look at eBay ended sales to see what sold prices are for CGC copies. And also go to gpanalysis.com and you can see all the sales for graded copies over the years. On the census, we have the 3 9.9s, 917 9.8s, and almost 1,500 9.6s. And we have another 600 signature series copies of this book. Number 2 of the year. This has been a classic cover for a long time, and it's had massive jumps in the past year. Incredible Hulk 340. The Hulk battles Wolverine, and it also features Todd McFarlane artwork. So this proves that some comics are truly going up in value because of iconic covers, not because of any first appearances, etc. Print run of this book was only 163,000 copies. Hulk was not selling that well for Marvel at this time period. It's the 25th most valuable Marvel comic of the decade. Over 6,000 copies graded, 2,500 9.6 or better. Heritage has sold 81 copies. Here's the direct and the newsstand edition of this classic cover. And there's a lot of homage covers being put out even today based on this cover artwork. In the Overstreet price guide, huge jump in all grades this year alone. It's really had a jump. And you can see in just the last 3 years, the book has doubled in value in raw grades. So the CGC or the high grade copies have gone nuts. We have 3 9.9s, 802 9.8s, 1,730 9.6s, 1,200 more signature series copies. And believe it or not, 55 qualified copies, 32 restored. Everybody's getting this graded, including 2 copies of an Italian edition. And of course, the #1 most valuable Marvel comic of 1988 ranks #1 of the year and #1 of the decade. This is the Marvel comic of the 80s. Everyone wants it. Maybe everyone already has it. A lot of copies out there. Print run was not small. This book has been a key for over 30 years. But looking at the price growth in the Overstreet price guide, you can see it's really moving. And this year had its biggest boom ever. And we're talking about Amazing Spider-Man 300, classic cover, Todd McFarlane art, and the first full appearance of Venom, Eddie Brock in the black costume. Iconic cover now. There are 10 copies graded 9.9. Print run estimated at 271,000 copies. And this is the last issue where Spider-Man wears the black alien costume. Of course, it's the most valuable Spider-Man related comic of the 80s. It ranks #1 for everything. Over 21,000 copies graded by CGC, 4,500 9.6s or higher. Heritage has sold over 400 copies of this iconic thick issue, which had a $1.50 cover price back then. So people had to pay extra for this issue 300 anniversary issue. Overstreet price guide. Look at the growth of this book. In the last 15 years, it's gone up 5 times in price in lowest grades and also 5 times in higher grades. And again, CG Census sales for super high grade 9.8s have gone through the roof. We have 10 9.9s, 1,153 9.8s. We have over 4,000 signature copies of this, 500 restored copies, and almost 200 qualified copies graded. And we also have a Filipino, a Dutch, and a Spanish edition of this book, which also have a couple copies graded on the census because it's such a major key. Now, what I want to do is compare all these books on the CGC census, and let's see what we learn about their rarity and what people are hoarding and which books are actually truly rare. So, of course, by far on this list, Spider-Man 300 has the most copies graded, 21,000 copies, followed by Wolverine 1 with 10,000. And then we've got X Factor 24 with almost 3,000 copies. We got Spider-Man 299 with 5,400, Spider-Man 298 with 6,200. A lot of massive superhero books on this one. This is a really big year for Marvel. On the opposite end, of course, we've got the Masters of the Universe issues. Very few copies graded, in fact, under 100 for each book, and less than 30 9.8s of the 2 books. And of course, the rarest technically is the Mobius 5 epic graphic novel, only 2 copies graded, period. That is it. Now, if we want to know also which are kind of the rarest ones in super high grade, well, it's going to be those same books. In terms of the superhero books, it's actually Spider-Man 301 is quite low. There's only 180 9.8, but all the other superhero books are really high on this list. So there you go. Fun comparison just to see which books all the collectors want and which books everyone's getting graded and which the books people are predicting are going to be the ones that just keep increasing year by year as these books get older. Of course, these books right now are a third of a century old. So their legacy is guaranteed at this point. Please subscribe to this channel. I do this series every week. And I got lots of great videos. I'm going to keep learning the history of Marvel Comics and their historic books and learn some history and rarity and price increase if you're a collector or investor. Thanks for watching.